Hello and welcome back to our show, The Business of Business with the City of Omaha. My name is Jared Anderson. I'm the Program Administrator for the Economic Equity and Inclusion Program.
I'm Christian Espinosa from the Small and Emerging Business Program.
And today we have a guest from Douglas County Purchasing Department. We've asked him to join us to give us the details on how DC purchasing works in collaboration with contractors, especially those in the SEB program. And first of all, we want to give you a little background for Eric, so I'm going to kind of hand it over to him, but I know he has been with Purchasing Department here for 10 years, coming in April. And then go ahead, Eric, give us a little background on what you've been doing before.
Sure. Well, as Jared mentioned, I started out in Douglas County Purchasing almost 10 years ago. And my background primarily has been in what we call IT procurement, purchasing hardware, software, various other peripherals that would go into like a data center or other IT type environments. So coming to the county, it's been a great change for me because there's so much breadth of product and services that we now support. So I've really enjoyed kind of that expanding my knowledge in terms of just overall procurement.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, well, we're going to kind of get right into the questions today, so you'll see a little back and forth between Christian and I as usual. But with the first question, I'll let Christian take it away.
And this is just to get a little background history of the Purchasing Department. Could you please explain how the Purchasing Department was created?
Sure. In general, purchasing is in government is generally a kind of a centralized department. And up until 2004, there was a separate purchasing department for City of Omaha and Douglas County. Through an initiative between City Council and the County Board, they started looking at ways of kind of leveraging kind of like resources. And in 2004, they underwent a purchasing cooperative, or shall we say a
interlocal agreement?
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, interlocal agreement, which allowed us to basically merge the departments. And so over time, most of the employees that were working in the city, once they retired, we replaced them with county employees. But moving forward, and since then and up until today, we provide the purchasing functions for both the City of Omaha and Douglas County.
Awesome. All right. So, and can you explain more about what the functions are?
Sure. We do a number of things. I mean, obviously, as you can imagine, most departments will need various supplies, services, and things like that. And on a day-to-day basis, maybe it's just as simple as office supplies and so on. So our buyers and the folks within our department will help the city and county departments make sure they're following the right processes and following the right city charter or the County Purchasing Act to make sure that we're not violating the public trust in terms of how we use that money. So they engage with our departments, and then all the way up to when we have things that are a little more spend in terms of dollars, they might have to do more of a kind of an informal bid or what we call a quote. And then sometimes it rises to the level of actually a formal bid. So our folks within our department that work for me will work with those departments and go through the steps of putting together the package to request the product and then ultimately to the end where we actually do an award, whether it goes to City Council or the County Board, so that we can actually help them make the purchase.
Right. Okay.
And sorry, can you explain a little bit of the informal bid?
Sure. Typically, when you have, like, say something, and it's different for both city and the county, so I will say that, basically if you're looking at something that's over 5,000, but it's not up to 20,000, that would be considered an informal bid on the county side, where the county will be over 20,000, but basically under 50,000. And so what we would do in that case is, again, we would go out typically and ask for maybe at least 3 quotes to basically meet the requirement. Sometimes it's not always possible, so the nice thing is the language says if it's practical. But we'll work with our departments to make sure that we've got some transparency there, because we want to give the businesses in the area an opportunity to participate, not just go and ask one vendor and say, hey, give us a quote. So that would be the informal bid process.
Okay.
Great.
Makes sense. As far as explaining how the other side works with the bidding process, so the formal, is that what it would be called?
That's correct, yes.
Can you kind of tell us a little bit about how that process works?
Sure. As you can imagine, because of the dollars involved, it's a little more involved, and so our department will usually assign a buyer to work with the department. And then they'll work with them and develop the specifications of what is it they need. If it's real specific in terms of an item, then it'd be essentially a bid. But if it's kind of more of a, hey, I've got a problem, I need a solution, it might be called an RFP. But ultimately, they approach the situation in the same way. What we do is our buyer will work with them and put together kind of when do we want it to go out, when do we need the proposals back. If you have a list of vendors that you want to work with to make sure that they're aware of the bid, we'll make sure that they're on our list. And as a side note to that, we do notify vendors that are in our database with the postcard to say, hey, there's this bid out here. Here's when questions are due. Here's when the bids are due. But I will say, even though you're not in our database, if you happen to see a bid out on our website, you're more than welcome to participate. So that's a question we get often. But we certainly try to make sure if we get vendors coming in and say, hey, I'd like to be on your vendor list, we'll certainly make sure that we have them and make them aware of the opportunities.
I know, Christian, you do some of that with the SEB application. It's one of the extra steps taken to get them on the vendor list.
Right, that was my question. Like if they want to get into the vendor list, where they should go?
They would just go to douglascountypurchasing.org. And there's actually a couple different links in there, but basically doing business with, or I think it's also under the forms section, they can go in and look, and there's a vendor application, and there's also a listing of classifications. We have our unique classifications. They're not like what some people may be familiar with.
Right, like the next codes.
Yeah, the next code. So it's kind of our own internal. But in that case, what they do is put down the actual supply codes that they, or services for that matter, that they feel are applicable to their business. And so that is how we would send out the notification to them based on that. And so that way they're aware if there's an opportunity that we think maybe might actually be applicable to what they do.
Okay, makes sense.
That's great.
I guess we'll move on to the second question. It kind of rolls into what we've been talking about. As far as the requirements, for the bidding process, what is the role that the purchasing department plays regarding the, maybe the architectural engineering, the construction contracts with the city?
Sure. The architectural engineering, a lot of times, are going to be kind of outside the normal scope. There's a way with the city charter as well as at the state level. A lot of times those are exempt from the formal bidding process, but they do have their own process they go through with an architectural engineering committee. Gotcha. So these firms may have to be on like a pre-approved list generally. Okay. And so our involvement is just to make sure that we can tell those vendors how to participate in those types of bids. With the contract, or the construction rather, we get very involved with, obviously, because we work with our both city and county departments to make sure that those specifications have all of the language that's needed to participate in the program. And then also just make sure that we have all the information we need. I guess the thing we like to do is make sure that the bid as it goes out has, we kind of anticipate some of the questions that we might have based on past experience. Last thing we want to do is have to put out what we call an addendum, which means having to change the specs 2 or 3 times, and that's, at that point it doesn't look good for us, and it makes it confusing for the vendors, and it makes them less likely to want to participate. So we try to make sure that those are clean and clear up front, and we work very closely with Christian and his folks from that particular, in terms of the SEB language, to make sure that's all included when it needs to be.
Awesome. Could you give us an example of what a package involves, like a general package when they give you a bid? What it should have?
Typically, a department will provide us kind of the specifications, and then we have kind of a template where we plug that into, and that way it allows to make sure that we have the basic language and what it means to do business with the county. Sometimes it's as specific as a draft of the contract that might be the result of the bid. So it can get really involved that way, so that the vendor knows, hey, if I get into this and I ultimately have the opportunity to be awarded a contract, what does it mean for me in terms of the insurance requirements, vendor responsibility forms and all those things that are required that they have to commit to in order to do business. So basically any of those forms, and some of it's driven by the department, some of it's driven by just the overall purchasing process, but ultimately we make sure that we're working very closely with the departments, that we've got the right packet of information that gets sent out there.
And usually contractors have to have 5% of bond capacity, right?
Yes. And as long as the bid, in those cases, typically they're going to be over $20,000 for the city. So yes, they would require to have what's called a bid bond. It's kind of a surety, if you will. Sometimes they can do a certified check where they can go to a surety company and get a bid bond. And that's, again, if it's over $20,000 anticipated. So yes, that is something very important to make sure that they include that along with the bid. We get that question a lot too, that, well, okay, I'm having trouble getting that, especially in today's situation with COVID. Sometimes they have difficulty getting into the bank, and they're like, I'm not sure, can I go ahead and put the bid in and then just after the fact, put the bid security? Unfortunately, that's not the case. And if they send in a bid, our city law and our folks within our bid committee, as myself as well, unfortunately have to reject that and send it back to the vendor. And that creates frustrations for the vendor as well.
So what happens if I don't have a bond, but I have a check, and I submit my check?
Okay. Again, an important thing to note, checks cannot be a company check or can't be a personal check. And it has to do with simply, it's not that we don't trust people, but frankly, we just need to make sure that the money is good. And so again, it's just their commitment really is what a bid bond's all about. That's the vendor's commitment that they would, if they have the opportunity to be awarded the bid, they are going to live up to the fact that they will do the work for the amount of money that they said they will do the work for. So yes, if they can't get a bid bond, then they have to get a certified check through a bank. And those are fairly easy to get, but again, that's important to note. We've had to reject a lot of bid proposals because somebody just wrote a company check out or wrote a personal check to put in with their bid, and unfortunately that's not valid.
So an important distinction, don't show up with a personal check or a company check.
Yes.
So imagine that I submit my bid, I put a check over there, and I don't get the bid when I get that check back.
The checks will be returned as soon as the bid is awarded to the awarded vendor. And just maybe make a note here, one of the things that we often see is people assume when they see the bids open or they see the tabulation, kind of getting a little ahead of myself, but we'll put the tabulation of all the proposals out on our website, usually the Friday after bids are open. So when they see the numbers, they automatically think, hey, I had the lowest number, so I must be the one that's getting awarded the bid. That's not always the case because there's other requirements, and certainly they have to make sure they meet all the other requirements of paperwork, as well as making sure that they have the ability to do the work. That being said, once we go to the award phase, and we do actually have a resolution on City Council or the County Board that it's being awarded to another vendor or even that vendor at that point, the bid security will be returned.
Right, thank you.
And contractors, that's the point, if you have an EEIP requirement, that you will have to make sure that you have that too, because that's a perfect example of where you could meet bid bond and all the other requirements, but if your EIP is not in, you may not be awarded that contract if you are not able to get that plan in. So that's a good distinguishing.
Yeah, and good point, Jared, because I've seen, I get copies of all these rejection letters that come from the departments, because part of the deal is they make sure the purchase is involved. So I get copied on those letters, and it seems like in the last month and a half, I've seen a number of those specific EIP forms not being included, and that's the reason why the bid was rejected.
Correct. And
Go ahead.
Yeah. So imagine that now I got the bid. I was awarded the bid. And it's like, hey, I do the work. Now pay me. How long it takes to get paid?
And again, I will say, not to cop out, but I'm not involved in that part of the process. But that being said, obviously, they will work with the department and actually get the contract.
So there's nothing to do with the purchasing department.
Yes, that is correct.
Just to make it clear.
Yeah, to make it very clear, don't call purchasing. No, the departments will work obviously with city law and with the vendor, and they'll make sure that the contract is put in place and they have all the information they need. There's going to be other bonding, believe it or not, at that point, because once you have the bid awarded, then you have a performance bond, and sometimes you have a payment bond, because they want to make sure that if you have subcontractors, that you're guaranteeing that you're going to pay those subcontractors. We have often cases where people come to us and say, hey, this vendor got awarded a project, sometimes multi-million dollars, and they're a sub that maybe is selling them the concrete, or just as an example, and they're not getting paid.
Right.
So, we'll make sure that we give them the information, and we provide them a copy as on request. We give them the copy of the performance and payment bond, and then they can, take the steps they need. Hopefully it never doesn't happen. But that being said, once the vendor is awarded, like you say, they'll have a contract, and then the insurance and the performance bond or anything else that's required will have to be done and complete before we can give what's called a notice to proceed, and that's usually coming from the department.
Yep. So a lot of things that come into what we were asking about, what the contracts look like, the process, what the documentation looks like for a contractor. And it can be it might sound like it's a little intimidating, which I believe we kind of touched upon this. There might be some mistakes that contractors make, when bidding with the city. What advice would you give to prospective bidders, or maybe, bidders that are not as seasoned with the process? Is there anything that you would make kind of a theme that they need to keep their eye on from the very get-go?
Right. I would say they just really need to, and again, it does probably sound daunting, especially for somebody maybe just dipping their toe in the water, but I think it's key to really read the bid specifications. And I think we clearly state out, we do a good job working with Christian as well as the departments to make sure if there are specific things that are absolutely required to be correct at the time of the bid proposal. There are certain things that will be considered like what they call a correctable error. That's something that city law will indicate. And that would be like not an original signature on the bid bond. Hey, that's okay. But they give them 10 days to go ahead and rectify that, or they will move forward at some point. But the things that are absolutely required, the forms that are absolutely required, as part of that process, and there's just no, looking the other way and saying, hey, we understand, maybe you didn't quite get it. We generally, the questions will come in prior to the bid getting received. We'll put out an addendum with all the questions. So if they really don't understand, the best thing I would advise is look at the bid specs and say, hey, when are the questions due? Send the bid, question to, the bid folder or bid email. It's bidquestions@douglascounty.org. It's usually listed right on the bid, so it's very straightforward, and it'll tell you exactly when the questions are due. We will put out what's called an addendum at that point. That's the kind of addendum we like to do because it means people are interested in the bid. And we'll say, here's all the questions that were asked. We don't duplicate, but we'll say, here's all the questions, and here's all the answers. So then they can go to that addendum. And that's what we'll typically do is direct them and say, hey, your question may very well have been addressed. It's very important to note we have a clear process there that we don't, once the bid's out on the street, we don't take emails to the buyer, we don't take emails to me, or phone calls to purchasing or the department. We have clear language in there that says, you would be in violation of the bid process if you go outside of that prescribed way of asking questions. So we just want to make sure people understand that that's just follow that process. And we will assist you, through by way of an addendum as much as we can through the process. So that way, hopefully, it'll help them navigate that, not feel as overwhelmed and intimidated.
And a lot of times, I would imagine that contractors may have similar questions.
Yes.
So it's probably a good idea to use that resource to get the emails in, follow the correct process, because the addendums themselves can come out pretty quickly. Is that right?
Right. Yeah.
So,
we'll typically have the first addendum. It's usually probably roughly, the week before the bid is going to be received. So there's plenty of time for them to react. There are times where maybe the specs have changed so drastically. We don't like to do this, but sometimes the bid will get changed in terms of the actual opening date. Okay. So it's important to note that addendum might actually indicate that we've moved it an extra week or two because of something material that changed. That we want to make sure we get it right, because the last thing we want to do is get no responses or basically not be able to award and then have to rebid it again. Right.
So, and when is opening day for the county and for the city?
Yes, it is every Wednesday, barring a holiday prior of that week, because we can't control the mail in that case. But typically, it's every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time.
And what they have to do? What do they have to do to the bid? Do they have to put it in a folder?
They put it in a sealed envelope. They need to put the name of the vendor, the name of the bid, have all the paperwork in it along with the bid security, and make sure they deliver it to the city clerk's office in the Civic Center. And that's very important. And we have a box outside their office. I know a lot of times with COVID and everything in our building, it's not as open. The office itself is not open to the public. Right. But if they mail it in, great. We make sure as long as it's received by the dock before 11 a.m., it'll be accepted. If they're bringing it in by hand, make sure they allow plenty of time for parking. You know how many times we've said, I'm late because I couldn't find a parking spot and get through security. So just know that as a bidder, take that extra time. That you can be there by say 10 a.m. on a Wednesday. Don't try to push it and try to find a parking spot at 10:30. And then try to make it into the building and then get upstairs and get it delivered, because unfortunately we're not going to be able to make an exception. That's something that's another clear no exceptions. And we've had bids show up, had RFPs rejected in the past years for major projects because they showed up at like 11:05.
And it doesn't matter if you call us. We are not going to hold anything back. You just have to walk in and drop your application. If you call me or call Eric, we have nothing to do with that.
And if you get through security, they can, if you don't know where to go, they'll direct you upstairs, and it's pretty well marked out. Come this way, there's a big drop box, it's secure. So you're not just dropping it in somewhere where it's open to the public or anything. Right. So just want to throw that in there too. It's pretty easy to locate. As far as final question here, I guess, because we've talked about process and common mistakes, where the purchasing department came together and was centralized in the back. the backstory there. So going forward, I guess the question we had is DC Purchasing looking into, what are they looking into to stay innovative or to encourage specifically some of the smaller emerging businesses like in Christian's program to continue to participate with the City of Omaha?
Absolutely. Well, I think one of the major things we've done, we've taken a lot of feedback from vendors. We've taken a lot of feedback from other entities that we work very closely with, like City of Lincoln, Lancaster, Sarpy County, et cetera. They're all in the same boat. We all do the same thing. We have the same processes. And we realize that it's not always feasible to do this in-person, bid process on Wednesdays. So it's a very good question that Christian asked, because we are very, we're taking deliberate steps now, actually, and I feel very confident within this calendar year we're looking to kind of move towards what would be considered an online bidding process. And what that would mean is that, and again, to the vendors that you're speaking of, especially that we reach out to, if you've got a computer and you have access to email, you will be able to go ahead and see the bids online on our website, and then actually submit the bid and all the required paperwork and everything electronically. That'll go into a system, platform basically that'll process that. And I think it's going to streamline our process. We'll be able to turn things around much more quickly. And I do believe that's going to allow people, in terms of vendors within this area, increased participation from those folks, because I think it's going to make it, again, from those vendors we've said, hey, I couldn't do this. If you'd only done an online bidding, and I've heard that in the last 2 months. And so I think, between the City of Omaha and Douglas County, we're all very much on board. And so we're kind of navigating the process to make sure that we meet the requirements of the city charter. And because, technically the city charter says we opened up sealed bids, right? And that's so we have the definition of sealed bid probably will have to be clarified a little bit. Thankfully, it won't be a change to the charter, but it will be a kind of a clarification probably that'll be brought before the City Council, just so that they understand here's where we're moving. And we're certainly not an early adopter in that respect. City of Lincoln Lancaster has been doing online bidding for probably at least 10 years. And they love it. And it's really improved participation in terms of number of bids that they get in for their projects. I think certainly, to me, that's the biggest part, and I think I didn't touch on it earlier, but what we're all about from a purchasing perspective and government accountability is transparency. And so not only do we want to make sure we have availability to vendors that want to participate and we make it easy for them to do so, we also want to be able to show on the back end, here's what we did, here's our bid, and here's all the information in terms of the bidders that responded. And then, that transparency will help, I believe, in terms of the constituents. We're using tax dollars after all. So that's the reason why we have a process. It's not because we want to be difficult and make it hard to do business with the city or the county for that matter. But again, I think they appreciate the fact that they can have some confidence in the fact that we're doing appropriate things with that money. Whether it be tax dollars or other funds that we get in terms of grant funds. Either way, we want to be responsible, and then we can show and demonstrate that that's what we do.
Excellent. Yeah, that makes total sense to me, at least. Do you have anything else that you'd like to add, Christian? Any other questions or anything?
I think it was a great interview.
Yeah, there's a lot of information there. Where would anybody, if they had questions after seeing something like this, who would be the best person to contact or the best website to contact for
well, I would say just go to our purchasing website. It's www.douglascountypurchasing.org. And from that website, there's multiple links. If they just click on Contact Us, I will tell you that email will come directly to me. It may be not directly apparent to you, but I will respond to those emails.
Okay.
And otherwise, there's also a phone number on there that you can call, and our folks within the department, whoever might be available, if I'm not available, will be more than happy to talk you through just the basic process, how to get registered as a vendor, how to, just in general, what is purchasing all about? And we a lot of times we end up kind of in a way, we kind of joke that purchasing kind of becomes like the call center for the county and the city at times. So they're not sure where the call needs to go. We're going to make sure that we'll tell them, hey, this is how you get registered for architectural engineering. This is how you do bids. This is how you, follow the process. And again, all the links on there, we update them very regularly. There's actual, so it's very step-by-step and very, I believe, user-friendly. But if it doesn't make sense, shoot me an email, give us a call.
And so, we're going to be posting all this video in our social media platforms. We have a Twitter account and a Facebook account. Please give us a like so you can see that information. If you have questions about it, the questions that we already addressed in this program, you can watch the video again, or you can call any of us for more information.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for visiting us today, being our guest, Eric, for the Human Rights and Relations Department. I'm Jared Anderson, and this is.
And I'm Christian Espinosa.
And we just gave you the business of the business for the city of Omaha. Have a great one.
Thank you.